Mike Tyson became the youngest heavyweight champion in history at 20 years old. 18 months later, the man who made that possible was dead. And in the silence that followed, no one asked what happens when you remove the only person standing between a weapon and the world. 'Cause D'Amato didn't just train Tyson. He insulated him. From the industry. From the predators. From himself. D'Amato controlled who had access. Who spoke to him. Who got paid. He built walls around a kid from Brownsville who had been arrested 38 times by age 13. The walls were deliberate. D'Amato had seen what the boxing industry did to young talent. He'd watched fighters get chewed up and spit out. Watched champions lose everything to managers who saw them as assets, not people. So when he found Tyson in a juvenile detention facility in upstate New York, he didn't just teach him to fight. He became his legal guardian. D'Amato had been through this before. Floyd Patterson, his first heavyweight champion, had struggled under fame and expectation. With Tyson he went further. Total control. Total isolation from the machinery that destroys fighters. D'Amato moved Tyson into his home in Catskill. Gave him structure. Rules. Routine. Trained him not just physically but psychologically. Taught him to channel rage into precision. To see the ring as a place where control mattered more than chaos. The house in Catskill became a fortress. Media requests were denied. D'Amato decided when Tyson fought, who he fought, and under what conditions. He negotiated contracts assuming everyone in boxing was trying to exploit his fighter. When D'Amato died in November 1985, those walls came down overnight. Tyson won the title 11 months later. The narrative was triumph. The youngest ever. Unstoppable. A force of nature in the ring. But behind that, something else was already unraveling. And almost no one with the power to stop it said anything. D'Amato had handpicked two men to continue his work after his death. Jim Jacobs, who handled Tyson's business affairs, and Kevin Rooney, who trained him in the ring. Both men understood D'Amato's philosophy: keep Mike focused, keep him protected, keep the chaos at a distance. Jacobs was meticulous. He maintained D'Amato's financial discipline. Tyson's earnings were structured conservatively. Jacobs reviewed every contract, every deal, every opportunity with the same paranoia D'Amato had modeled. He said no more often than yes. Rooney maintained the training regimen exactly as D'Amato had designed it. Hours of defensive drills. Endless repetition of the peekaboo style. The work wasn't glamorous, but it was effective. Tyson's early title defenses were masterclasses in controlled violence. Then Jim Jacobs died in March 1988. Suddenly, the business side had no gatekeeper. And into that vacuum walked Don King. King didn't discover Tyson. He didn't build him. He arrived after the foundation was laid and convinced Tyson that the people D'Amato trusted were stealing from him. That his trainer didn't respect him. That his co-manager's widow was profiting off his name. King isolated Tyson from everyone D'Amato had positioned to protect him. The approach was systematic. King presented himself as the only person who truly understood what Tyson deserved. He framed D'Amato's team as remnants of an old system. He promised bigger paydays, more control, global recognition. The financial arrangement King constructed was designed to appear generous while extracting maximum value. Tyson was paid millions per fight. The numbers looked staggering. But the structure funneled money through King's promotional company, which took percentages at multiple stages. Tyson would later discover that fights generating $30 million in revenue might leave him with $8 million after all the cuts were taken. King's contracts were labyrinths. Promotional fees, management fees, training expenses, production costs. Each layer peeled away a portion of the gross. And because Tyson was fighting frequently, the total revenue looked enormous even as the actual take-home was being systematically reduced. More importantly, King controlled access. Controlled information. Controlled who Tyson spoke to about business. The people who might have explained the contracts were no longer around. And Tyson, at 22, was signing documents he didn't fully understand with no one to translate the implications. The lawyers in the room worked for King. The accountants reported to King. There was no independent voice saying, "Wait, let's review this." No one performing the function D'Amato and Jacobs had always performed. By late 1988, Kevin Rooney was fired. The last direct connection to D'Amato's training system was severed. Tyson's new trainer didn't challenge him, didn't drill the defensive discipline D'Amato had spent years instilling. The ring work became looser, sloppier, more reliant on raw power and less on technique. The public didn't notice at first. Tyson kept winning, kept knocking people out. But those who had been there from the beginning saw the difference. The peekaboo style eroding, the head movement slowing, the discipline fading. The difference was subtle but critical. D'Amato's system was built on defense first. Bob and weave, slip punches, make opponents miss, then counter with devastating power. It required constant drilling, repetition, mental focus. The new training approach abandoned that foundation. It relied on Tyson's natural gifts, his speed, his power, his intimidation factor. It worked as long as those gifts remained overwhelming. But gifts erode, especially without discipline to maintain them. And especially when life outside the ring becomes chaotic. Outside the ring, the chaos accelerated. A volatile marriage to Robin Givens that played out in tabloids. Public confrontations. Legal issues. And through it all, Don King kept Tyson fighting. Kept him generating revenue. Kept him away from anyone who might tell him to slow down. The media fed on it. Tyson's personal life became as much of a spectacle as his fights. Every detail was dissected, sensationalized, turned into content. And every controversy made the next fight more valuable. Networks paid premium rates for Tyson fights not just because of his skill, but because of the narrative. The uncertainty about whether he would implode before he even got to the ring. In February 1990, Tyson fought Buster Douglas in Tokyo. It was supposed to be a tune-up, an easy win before bigger fights. Instead, Douglas knocked him out in the 10th round. The aura of invincibility shattered in a single night. The loss revealed what those close to the situation already knew. Tyson had been fighting without the structure that made him great. Without the training regimen. Without the mental discipline. Without the protection. Douglas had prepared for 6 months. Tyson had treated it like an obligation. He showed up overweight, undertrained, distracted. The fight wasn't competitive. And when Tyson hit the canvas in the 10th round, it wasn't just a loss. It was confirmation that the system had failed. What followed is well documented. The rape conviction in 1992. 3 years in prison. The comeback fights. The Evander Holyfield ear bite in 1997. The financial collapse. A career that ended not with a bang but with 2 knockout losses to fighters he would have destroyed in his prime. But the question that gets asked less often is this: what if Jim Jacobs hadn't died? What if Kevin Rooney had stayed? What if the structure D'Amato built had remained intact? The easy answer is to blame Tyson. To say he made his own choices. That no amount of protection could have saved someone from themselves. And there's truth in that. Tyson was an adult. He signed the contracts. He fired the trainer. He committed the crimes. But that answer ignores the system. The fact that Tyson was 20 years old when his primary protector died. That he was 21 when his business manager died. That the people who replaced them had financial incentives that didn't align with his long-term well-being. It also ignores who Tyson was before D'Amato found him. A kid with no father. A mother who struggled with addiction and died when he was 16. A childhood spent in and out of juvenile detention. D'Amato didn't just teach him to box. He gave him structure, routine, discipline, and something close to family. D'Amato had been explicit about this. He told people that Tyson needed more than training. He needed someone to care about him independent of his value as a fighter. When that structure disappeared, Tyson didn't just lose his trainer. He lost the framework that had kept his life from collapsing. There's a clip from 1986, months after D'Amato's death, where Tyson talks about him in an interview. His voice breaks. He says D'Amato was the only person who ever cared about him as a person, not as a fighter. The only one who saw past the violence and the talent to the scared kid underneath. Without that anchor, Tyson was navigating a world designed to extract value from him with no one whose only interest was his well-being. It may not have been just about discipline failing. The boxing industry knew this. Promoters, managers, and networks watched it happen in real time. They saw a young champion being isolated from the people who understood him. They saw the training decline. They saw the chaos in his personal life. And they kept booking the fights. Because Tyson was profitable. Every fight generated millions. The pay-per-view numbers were staggering. And as long as he kept winning, no one with the power to intervene had an incentive to do so. The Nevada Athletic Commission could have stepped in, could have required psychological evaluation, could have mandated stable training conditions. But Tyson was selling out arenas and breaking pay-per-view records. Intervention would have meant lost revenue for everyone involved. Even after the losses started. Even after the prison sentence. Even after the scandals. The industry kept putting him back in the ring because Mike Tyson, even diminished, sold. This wasn't about discipline failing. It was about protection being removed and profit taking its place. Tyson has spoken openly in recent years about those years. About the people who took advantage. About the money he lost. About the psychological damage. He's rebuilt his life, found perspective, and achieved something close to peace. But that doesn't erase what happened. The youngest heavyweight champion in history became a cautionary tale not because he lacked talent, but because the people tasked with protecting him either died or were pushed out, and the ones who replaced them saw him as a revenue stream. The question isn't whether Tyson made mistakes. He did. The question is whether those mistakes were inevitable, or whether they were the predictable result of removing every safeguard that had been carefully constructed around him. And there's another layer here. The public played a role too. Not directly, but through demand. Tyson wasn't just a fighter. He was a spectacle. A force of nature. The baddest man on the planet. People paid to watch him destroy opponents in minutes. To see intimidation become physical domination. That image required Tyson to remain a certain way. Unstoppable. Fearless. Invincible. Any sign of vulnerability contradicted what people had paid to see. And the industry knew that. Knew that a Tyson who took time off to process grief or rebuild his training or address his personal chaos wasn't the Tyson that sold. So they kept him fighting. Kept him visible. Kept him performing the role even as the person underneath was unraveling. What does it mean to build a champion at 20 and then remove everyone who understood how fragile that construction was? The pattern isn't unique to boxing. Young talent identified early. Groomed for success. Monetized before they're old enough to understand the contracts they're signing. And then, when the structure collapses, blamed for their own downfall. Tyson's story is often told as a moral lesson about self-control. But it's also a story about what happens when the people who are supposed to protect young talent die or disappear, and the people who replace them have different priorities. And he wasn't the first. He won't be the last. The same machinery would turn again, on athletes and artists too young to see it coming. Some stories end. Legends don't. This is CLS.